glean from it and put into our life. Okay, what's he saying there to you? What's he saying there? To know wisdom, to know instruction, to perceive the words, to receive the instruction, justice, judgment, equity, to give prudence. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear. To learn is not an easy thing, is it? Ecclesiastes 12 of the making of books. There is much. It's hard work. Study is hard work. But what's he telling us right here? To learn something takes a little effort, and it's important. It's important to spend a little time digging into God's truth. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. What does that say to you? Tell me what you think that means. Tell me what that verse means to you. Y'all are a lot quieter than you used to be. What happened? Okay, fools don't like to be told what to do. You know, sometimes we use the word fool is used so broadly and so interchangeably that maybe sometimes we don't fully grasp what he's saying here, because we kind of use fool in a lot of different ways. But literally, someone who is foolish, someone who doesn't consider, think about all those things, perceiving and perceiving and receiving instruction and perceiving the words of understanding. What's the difference in receive and perceive? You take it in. If you receive it, you're willing to entertain it, willing to listen. But if you perceive it, what? You accept it, you get it, you understand. Have you ever known someone that just didn't get it or didn't seem to get it? And that's the understanding. If you're wise, you're listening and you want to listen, and you want to listen long enough and in a way that you start to get it so that it makes a difference to you. But fools don't want to be told. Fools despise wisdom. That's an interesting choice of words. That Hebrew word despise literally has the idea of stepping on something. Of stepping on it because it's unimportant. Of stepping on it because you disregard it as being important. So a fool literally despise or step on wisdom and instruction. They not only don't want to be told, they consider it what? They consider it what? Why does a fool treat wisdom and treat instruction and treat moral guidance as something has, say it again? It has no value or worth to them. Okay, now, put that into place. If something has no value and no worth to you, then what place of importance does it have to you? Nothing. How much time are you going to give it? Nothing. None. How much loyalty are you going to give it? None. Okay, so sometimes we say, I just don't understand how that person can disregard. Surely that person knows better. Surely that person, okay, and we're thinking what? Surely that person has the intellect. Surely that person has the mental capacity to take in these words and, and understand what they're saying. And they do, every one of those things. But see, we're judging, we're saying, how could they not get that? They do get it. How do they not see that? They do see it. That's not the problem. The problem is they have allowed themselves to become fools. Because remember, Matthew 7, what does the fool do? He builds his house where? On sand. What does the wise man do? The wise man, where does he build his house? On the rock. Okay, what's that rock? The what? The Word of God. And you know what's interesting? What's the difference in here's a trick question. What's the difference in the Word of God and Jesus? You're right. Nothing. There is no difference. Because this is what we have through Christ. That's why it's called the gospel of Christ. Because, and you know how I know that? Upon this rock I will build my church. Okay, that word rock in the Greek means literally a bedrock. A bedrock as big as this room. and as deep as this room. So solid it cannot shake. Now, in Matthew 7, now what was that rock, by the way? The fact he was the Son of God. Okay? Now, when he said in Matthew 7, the wise man built his house upon the rock, guess what? That's the exact same word. The same kind of rock. So he's saying literally that I am wise because I am divesting myself of my own will and investing in the will of God through Christ. Okay, so I go back to number 7, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. What's the difference between wisdom and instruction? Okay. Instruction, or, you know what I like about this Hebrew word? The word for instruction, it involves everything you could put on a list about knowledge. It involves the doctrine. It involves instruction. It involves reproof, warning. It involves guidance. It involves control. It involves, in other words, everything that goes with being able to do something the way it is supposed to be done is in that word instruction. So God instructs us. Makes me think of 2 Timothy 3 and verse 17, that the man of God may be perfect, truly furnished to all good works. Verse 16, inspired, all Scripture is given by the inspiration of God, profitable for what? Doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction. Every one of those ideas is in this word, instruction. And then wisdom, the ability to put that into play. Fools consider it unworthy. Fools consider it unimportant. Therefore, they're not going to embrace it. They're not even going to consider it. Okay, so what do we learn? That the habit of study and the desire to learn is an absolute necessity, because the beginning, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's just the beginning. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 15, what does it say? Somebody quote it. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Now, anybody got an ESV in front of them? What does 2 Timothy 2:15 say there? Besides, what does it say instead of study? The New King James says be diligent. Does it say diligent? Is that the ESV? American Standard, be diligent.
Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved.
Do your best. See, that word study is a little different for us. We rightly divide the word of truth, but do your best too. Wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to become what God wants us to be takes some, how would you finish that? Go ahead, say it. Work. What else? Dedication. Is that all you got? Take some what? Commitment. All of that involves effort. Okay, now let's look at verses 10 through 15. Let's look at verses 10 through 15. We're going to skip around here just a little bit. Somebody read verses 10 through 15.
Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their path.
Okay. There's a whole lot in that particular passage. What do you glean out of that? What do you think I have written here by these verses as the pearl of wisdom that we can learn? What would you say it is? Don't follow the crowd. Don't follow the crowd. Beware of dangerous companions and sinful influence. Is that still true today? Yes or no? Well, let's look a little closer Let's see what Solomon tells us particularly. Look at verse 10. If sinners entice you. You know, do you think the wording here is on purpose? Do you think the wording is on purpose? Yes, always. Yeah, it's very specific. Yes, that's right. Well, no, I mean, do you think that God uses these particular words for a reason? Sure He does. Entice. Think about that for a minute. If sinners entice you, do not consent. That suggests, if we're learning the principles here, to me, brethren, that suggests that we have control of our own choices. That we have control. But you know, sometimes, don't we live in a world that suggests that isn't the case? That we can be overpowered. I shouldn't be held responsible for my behavior, or maybe held responsible for my bad choices because I was overwhelmed by the influence of the internet. I was overwhelmed by the influence of the people I work with. I was overwhelmed by... But the word entice, what does it mean? Sir? Tempt? Lure? Give me an example of that. The word entice. The serpent in the garden is a great biblical example. Because he didn't just come right out and say, here's my deal, take it or leave it, did he? Now it makes me think of, now don't be offended, I'm sorry, what? Joseph's wife. Say that one more time.
Joseph's master.
Oh yeah, Potiphar. That's right. And she enticed him. Well, that's easy. Easy to understand. We get it. And so it'd be easy to hear you if I stop talking. Sorry. What about a modern example? I think of, now, if there's anybody in here who is a car salesman, don't think I'm about to be I'm not being ugly about car salesmen. I'm really not. But I remember, maybe it's different. Do we have any car salesmen in here? Okay. I'm not really being negative. I just remember some of the experiences that I've had, and I remember I'm not very good. My wife stopped. In fact, we moved to East Tennessee, moved to Sevierville, but before that, she stopped doing something that she had done a couple of times. We went up there a couple of times on those, free vacation. You've been there. Free vacation. And you go and listen to this little speech, and she said, just sit there and be quiet and just listen to them. Why? Before we left there, I was about to buy the whole thing, And he went, he said, I'll let y'all talk about it. She said, what are you doing? We can't afford that. Yeah, but it's really good. She said, don't you say another word. So I can't go back in there. But he kept making it so good. They would come back. I'd say, no, that's too much for me. And then he'd say, well, I've talked to my... I found out now that I think I've gone and talked to my manager's code for I've gone around the corner and drank a Coke while I let you think about it a while. But that's how sometimes car salesmen have talked to me. They've made it so sweet, how could I possibly pass it up? They keep coming back. I'll throw in this and I'll throw in that and I'll do this. And I said, okay, let me think about that just a little bit. I still can't afford it, but I sure don't want to pass up a free meal. Or some silly something. They're enticing me. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Don't you? They keep throwing in things that make you say, let me think about that. Let me think about that. Maybe I can pull this off after all. Now, put that down. That's the word. If sinners entice you. Sinners don't just say, hey, we need another guy. Come on. We think that you look like you're about tired of being a faithful member over there at Booneville. Come on, join us. Come on. It doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way in the garden. Satan talked his game, didn't he? It didn't work that way. She understood, apparently, why did Joseph, Potiphar's wife, keep coming back? Well, that's a trick question, because he said no the first time. Didn't. And so she didn't take no for an answer. Satan didn't take no for an answer. The car salesman didn't want to take no for an answer. So he kept trying to find things to keep me at the table. When sinners entice you, do not consent. What does the word, aside from being obvious, what does the word consent mean to you? Agree. To go along with it. What? To give in. That Hebrew word, it obviously means agree. That Hebrew word means be acquiescent. And that's just a big old word that means you agree, but agree almost in, that it has the idea to it of agreeing in steps. Does that make sense? That it, it's not just a yes or no. Not just a yes or no. Have any of you ever bought a car, bought a house, or bought something else? You don't have to tell me that if you don't want to. That you actually at first said, no, too expensive, or too no something. And the more you thought about it, the more you thought, maybe, let me think about that some more. And you keep thinking about it. The more you thought about it, the more things that you flat out turned down before, you flat out said, You kind of talked yourself out of those and into. That ever happened to anybody else besides me? Okay, there's two people in here. Two honest people. Okay, that word has that kind of meaning. Don't consent. It doesn't literally mean yes, I will or no, I won't. It means don't be pulled into an agreeing mindset. Now, what kind of Christian mindset does it take for us to do that? To not give in, to prevent giving in. What do we have to be with? Oh, very good. You have to decide ahead of time. That's right. Sure.
We have a lack of fear of God. The Bible says, it gives examples of all great men fear God. Noah feared God. Moved with fear in the heart. This goes back to when we fear God and keep His commandments. Be distinctive, be unique. Stand up. That's what was said, from the pulpit. Absolutely. Be different.
I think, like Donnie said, it's not enough to listen to come to church, listen to the preacher, go home. We've been doing that. I think you got to completely flip it. Entice the sinner to come to church. Work on them. Jesus didn't run from the sinner. He confronted the sinner and changed the sinner. And we've forgotten that.
Absolutely.
And that takes a special kind of Christian toughness to do that, but that's what we're supposed to do.
And go ahead, Jeremy.
What I was saying before is back in verse 10 says if a sinner, you have to be able to identify a sinner and their actions and know and discern what they're doing as being right or wrong, or what they're trying to get you to do is right or wrong.
Absolutely. And that goes back to what we said a moment ago, and the idea of Jesus. We talked about how Jesus loved the sinners, ate with them, talked to them, healed them, befriended them even, but He never condoned them. He told them to stop sinning and impressed upon them the need to have obedient faith, didn't He? Now, to add to what you said a minute ago, look at verse 15. And we could talk about some of their enticements, the idea of all kinds of precious possessions in verse 13. Fill our houses with spoil, cast in your lot among us. Let us have one purse. Let's all be on one side. What does that phrase in verse 14, cast in your lot among us, mean? Do what? Be part of us. Now, why would that be an enticement? I want you to think about something. Remember, I'm a high school educator. No. I've got an advantage over you perhaps in this, probably not. Because what's mentioned in verse 14 is what most high school students struggle with. who get themselves in trouble. Yes. Peer pressure, and the main peer pressure that sometimes we don't realize, we don't see or think about as older adults, is belonging to something, good or bad, is better than belonging to nothing. Being accepted by people who mistreat me is better than not being accepted at all. And some of you are thinking, nobody would make that kind of decision. If you're alone, you will. They will. That's what that verse, cast in your lot among us, let us have one purse. That translates in 2018 to be a part of us. Be accepted by us. We will love you like family. Now, none of those things are true. Just as surely as Satan wasn't telling the whole truth in the garden. But that's an enticement. It's an enticement to adults sometimes, even.
Yes, but if you go back and you look at verse 8, my children, listen when your father corrects you. If you go down to verse 10, it says, my child, if sinners entice you, turn your back on them. That wasn't said in a way of friendly advice. He said, if they do this, you better not do it.
Right.
That's what he said.
For time's sake, I skipped it. I probably should have skipped that center because the second point was, listen when those who love you are trying to tell you something.
It's okay to be different. And that's something we talk to children. You don't have to do this. This is what keep yourself out of harm's way.
Absolutely. Now, what was... Are you raising your hand? Oh, okay, sorry. That's the teacher in me. Sorry about that. Think about what you just said back in verse 8, the instruction. Okay. Then it goes into verse 10, don't do it. Now look at verse 15. Somebody said a minute ago, before you said what you did, about knowing before you make the choice. Do not walk in the way with them. Okay, again, that's a command. Don't do it. Don't walk. But look at the next part. Keep your foot from their path. Okay, do not walk in the way with them. Don't go. That's pretty simple. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. But wait a minute. Keep your foot from their path. There's two other things there along with don't go. Along with the definitive decision, don't go. Goes back to what Jeremy said, or I think somebody said. Their path. Whose path? Okay. So how do you recognize, if in order to not go down a sinful path, the sinner's path, the wrong path, the path. If you don't know the difference between what a good choice is and a bad choice is, what a good path is, I'm tired for that. We don't want to do that. We have this underlying fear, or at least I did, that if I tell them about it, then they'll know it exists. But if I don't ever mention it, if I don't ever talk to them about it, then they won't ever know it's there. It's uncomfortable. Did we think that? Do you think? Oh, I think, okay, we don't mean to, we don't realize, but I see some heads doing this, that we don't sit down and say, look, you're about to be faced with, and let me tell you about it. And we say, no, I can't do that. That's exposing them to evil. I had a father tell me years ago, I would never tell you who or where, but first got aggravated, got mad at me for teaching the morals of dating and so forth in a classroom. This was an 8th grader, 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade. And he said to me, are you teaching Bible verses about morality and sex and stuff like that? I said, well, yeah, we're covering that as a part of it. He said, my son won't be back to that class. When he gets ready for it, I'll tell him. He's 14. I'm so afraid that the world is going to hit him really, really hard. Do you understand where I'm coming from? We have to be with... Yes, sir.
spiritual matters. And I said, all right. So we picked a few, and they ranged for me from very simple things to complex things. What amazed me is when we do sales training, which I despise, they make us do role play, which I also despise. But what was hilarious is I had these kids try to have a conversation about a scriptural matter with another Christian. And the other Christian was pretending to be the sinner. And they couldn't do it. I don't mean that as a derogatory towards parents or us as teachers or whatever, but not once in our entire curriculum had we ever taught them and made them have a conversation. Nor are we doing that with decisions like what you're talking about either. We feed them Bible facts, but we don't give them life skills. What was hilarious is the things that I hate the most, that role play and that stuff I had to do when I did learning for those techniques, they told me at the end of the class it was their favorite thing they did. And I think that's a lesson we can learn for anyone of any age, for that matter.
I have a question. What about if you start from the beginning, when you first have children, and you teach them right from wrong, and you lead by example, and that there's no gray area in between? Will they not grow up being able to discern right from wrong?
Sure. Yes. And that's what that should be our goal. That's what we strive for. Absolutely. And I think we have scriptures to point that out. That's right. Yeah, we have to be consistent. And oh, absolutely. Of course.
And I can't, should bring something up, I can't discuss it thoroughly, but I think my secretary at the time, the young people in the church where she attended had a role play where this group came in and they pretended to be Satan. Do you all remember anything like that? And instead of, Satan is very ugly and horrible looking. And what he says, his voice is not, it's only beautiful and soothing when he's trying to get us to do something. But this group presented Satan and his wiles as he really was, a horrible, ugly, vicious, frightening person. And it scared those teenagers to death. It frightened them because they had never seen, when we meet the devil, sometimes we don't know that's him.
That's right. Absolutely. In fact, Corinthians, first or second, I can't remember which, talks about his devices and him changing, his angels changing themselves into ministers of light. Of course we do. Oh, it's 8 o'clock. Ooh. It was 7:42 3 minutes ago. What happened? I'm sorry, go ahead. Absolutely. I think that's what the point I hope we were making from verse 15 is that they have to know what the path looks like and make that choice to walk the right path. Well, that's about a third of what I intended to do. So I got farther than I thought I would. Thank you very much for your attention.